today we're going to finish this series, and we're going to look specifically at something that is definitely a cultural phenomenon that we're seeing. They did a study in the UK recently, and they actually discovered that children in their normal development kind of scheme, that kids actually need to learn how to rest. They need to learn how to rest the same way that they would learn how to walk, run, talk, read, and play. That rest is a skill to be learned. That rest is a skill to be practiced. And it actually takes learning. That you and I don't rest well by default. We just don't. It's not something that's wired in us. But just like rest is learned through practice and repetition, so is restlessness. Restlessness is also a product of certain things that we do, certain ways that we live, certain rhythms that we have in our day-to-day life. And today, culturally, one of the things we've seen over this series especially is that today we are stuck in a chronic state of restlessness. That in culture we just have this kind of angst that's just always under the surface. This kind of low-grade hum of anxiety. This culture of hurry, this culture of productivity, this culture of distraction, and this attention economy that we've been talking about, that there's always something fighting to take energy from us and to draw our attention away from things that really matter to things that simply are trivial. It leaves us with kind of a never-ending hunger for more, for better, and for newer. And we end up emotionally and just relationally numb because of this. Overstimulation in any way leads to numbness. And culturally, we're stuck in this chronic state of accumulation and accomplishment because that's our new normal. And so we're running at this pace, we're running on this wheel, and we don't really know how to get off. And that's what we've been doing over this series is we've been trying to slow down enough and look specifically not just at like helpful self-help kind of methods to be a better you, but to look specifically at the way of Jesus. To look specifically at how Jesus practiced life and how he modeled certain rhythms for you and I to follow him, not just as a helpful guru, but as God in flesh who knows exactly how to pour out his energy perfectly, how to prioritize relationships perfectly, how to order his love perfectly, so that nothing is ever out of order. And so, it's important as we finish this series to finish on the note of how do we address this chronic restlessness in our culture. Well, I'll tell you how we don't do it. We don't do it by not paying attention to how we do it. Emotionally healthy spirituality does not happen by default. Your default in mind is not just to drift towards wholeness. Our drift is towards brokenness. Our drift is towards self-accomplishment. Our drift is towards enthroning ourselves as the masters of our life. That's our drift. So if we're going to be emotionally healthy and we're going to be spiritually mature, it doesn't just happen. It doesn't happen with time. It doesn't happen with age. It doesn't happen with doing religious things. It doesn't happen with just experience. Like one day you're just going to wake up and you're going to be amazing at this. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of practice, and it takes a ton of grace. A ton of it. A ton of patience. It takes us being as patient with ourselves as God is with us. It takes us trying to move towards health and failing, and then getting back up and trying it again, and committing to certain disciplines and rhythms and not doing them well, and then trying again. And it takes practice. I read a book recently by Tish Harrison Warren. Here's what she says. Watch this. In her book, The Liturgy of the Ordinary, she says, in our workaholic, image-barraged, over-caffeinated, guilty? Anyone? Okay, all right. Entertainment-addicted and supercharged culture, submission to our creatureliness, I love that word, is necessary and often overlooked part of discipleship. It's one of the most overlooked parts of our discipleship, that we are kind of just stuck in a creatureliness, that you and I are not self-sufficient beings. That there's this weird thing at the end of the day, you've noticed it, called sleep. Have you noticed that? And it's just kind of like, it comes for you ruthlessly, right? And it never doesn't come for you, right? And sleep is this amazing thing. Some of you, when you're tired, you are horrible people. You're monsters, right? And there's something to that there's actually something built into our bodies that we surrender and submit to our creatureliness. That at the end of every 24-hour period, there is a time, some of us is after like 10 hours, we're like 4 p.m., you're like, I'm done with life, I need a nap, right? But our creatureliness is ruthless. It comes for us daily. And we could try to put it off, but it just makes things worse. That there's actually something about our creatureliness that is a gift to us. There's something deeply spiritual that God has woven into our very makeup that reminds us that we are not God, that we're not self-sufficient, that we're not all-powerful, that we're not all energized, that you can't just go and be who you want to be. Why? Because you need to sleep. Because you have limitations, because you have restrictions. Your socioeconomic bracket restricts you. Where you were born on this planet restricts you. Your ethnicity and culture and language restrict you. That we cannot go and be self-created, autonomous beings. We cannot because we were never created to be. And there's something about our creatureliness that just, in a very annoying but regular rhythm, reminds us of that. And in a culture of restlessness, we need this more than anything. A reminder that we're not self-made. A reminder that we're not self-sufficient. We know we're not, but we just kind of bury it and choose more and better and newer. But we still surrender to our creatureliness. Now my question this morning is there a practice that Jesus shows us? Is there a way that Jesus lives that invites us into a regular reminder of our creatureliness? Is there? I would say yes. One of the verses we've looked at over and over throughout this series is in Matthew 11. I'm going to read it in two different translations, two different English translations, because I think it does a lot of good justice for us. Watch the first one here. Jesus said, "Come to me, all." Pause for a second. It's an invitation. It's not a command. It's an invitation. Meaning that Jesus is addressing all people, regardless of where you're coming from, regardless of your religious background, regardless of your experience of church or no church. Jesus is saying, if you are tired and you're worn out and you're burnt out and you're restless, come. The invitation is open. Come to me. Meaning, he's inviting us to turn our attention away from objects of rest and objects of comfort that we normally turn to. And he's saying those may temporarily give you rest, but I'm inviting you to turn away from those objects of rest and come to me. It continues, all of you who are weary and you carry heavy burdens, you just feel heavy, and I will give you rest. I love that. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. How deep is that rest if it's actually for your soul? Now, sometimes in the West, we've turned soul into like the non-material part of us. It just kind of floats around after we're dead, or maybe not, right? But soul, biblically, is actually the deepest part of your identity. It's who you truly are. It's who you are when you're left alone. It's who you are in your thought world. It's who you are when you fantasize and dream about what treasures will make you happy. That's your soul. That's truly who you are. And Jesus is saying that those other objects of rest and trust may work to kind of appease or help keep back and like build a dam for that restlessness that's coming for you. But I'm the one that can truly give you rest at the deepest part, the deepest core of your person. For my yoke is easy to bear and the burden I give you is light. Now, yoke, if you understand what a yoke is in farming technology, a yoke is usually a big heavy piece of wood with kind of notches in it that you use to put two animals together. Right? And usually it's oxen, and you take a bigger oxen, stronger oxen, and a weaker one. Or if one ox is sick or weak or injured, you would yoke them to a stronger ox so that work could still happen. Now what's interesting here is that Jesus invites us into rest, but it sounds like work. With me on that? Like Jesus is like, come rest with me, but also here's a yoke. And he just kind of throws it on our shoulders. But what Jesus is saying in that is that I am the one who is self-sufficient. You are not. So if you come and yoke yourself to me, come and attach yourself to me, I will take the burdens that you don't even know are already on your shoulders, and I'll give you a lighter one. But what he does emphasize is that following after Jesus is still work. It's still a decision. It's still an active pursuit of Jesus. And I know sometimes we talk about grace and we're saved by grace through faith. Absolutely, there's nothing we do to earn, lose, or keep what God has given to us as a free gift. Amen. But when we receive that free gift, it also now requires for us to show that that faith is active and pursue him with our whole life. And that's what Jesus is stressing. That faith actually leads to obedience. And Jesus is saying there's a way to practice life living out the way that I have shown you. Now watch this other translation in the Message. It's a paraphrase translation. I love it. Are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burnt out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me and watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I love that. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. I don't know about you, but that sounds like how I want to live. Amen? Like I want to live freely and lightly. That's how I want to live. I want to live a life of unforced rhythms of grace. Just rhythms that reflect God's grace and goodness and they just come easily. But it takes practice. And it's a bit counterintuitive sometimes to think it's like we're saved by grace through faith, but then I also need to practice that. But following Jesus is something you do. It is as much a practice as it is a faith. And I've shared this verse with you before, but in 1 Timothy 4:7, an older Paul mentoring Timothy says to the young Timothy, discipline yourself for godliness. And the word discipline in the Greek is where we get the word gymnasium. One commentator I read years ago said, the word has a sweaty feel. That there's actually something about discipline and practicing new rhythms that bring us into godliness. Not earned, but practiced. Ways that we can practice. And I think the point of all this and this series that we've been going through is that why this takes practice is because practicing these rhythms is about a relationship with the living God. And all relationships take time. All relationships, especially our most meaningful ones, take time. It takes practice. It takes understanding. So, we're going to look at this last practice, this last discipline that Jesus lives out, so that we don't think that we can just drift towards this. Dallas Willard writes in his book about spiritual formation, watch this is really important. We cannot behave on the spot as Jesus did and taught if in the rest of our time we live as everybody else. The secret of the easy yoke, going back to that same verse, the yoke, is to learn from Christ how to live out total lives, how to invest all our time and our energies of mind and body as he did. I think so many of us are wondering why our lives don't look a little bit more like the faith that we profess. Well, are we even practicing the ways of Jesus? Would be the question. Are we actually practicing the ways that he demonstrated? Throughout this series, I've pointed it out to you that I think in the West, we've only looked at the red letters in our Gospels. We've looked at what Jesus has said, and we have forgot about all the black letters and looking at what Jesus did. And following after Jesus is not just doctrine in our head, it's a lifestyle to be lived in all of life. It affects every aspect of our life if it is a faith that is alive. And so Jesus is inviting us into that. So what is he inviting us into? Well, he's inviting us into Sabbath. He's inviting us into Sabbath rest. Now, if you noticed in that passage when Jesus is saying, come to me, and he's inviting us in, he says that I will give you what? Rest. Now, right away, in the first century context, as a Orthodox Jew, right away when Jesus said that word, immediately they would hyperlink right back to the Old Testament and look right at the Sabbath. There are few things as important in the regular rhythm of life for Israel than the Sabbath. And right after Jesus invites everybody to come and find rest, watch what he says. Remember sometimes our chapter dividers in the New Testament, they were put there for ease of organization, but they weren't necessarily how Jesus did things. But there's no division between chapter 11 and chapter 12 of Matthew, okay? So after he says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light, right away he goes here. At that time, in the same moment, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, so they began breaking off some heads of grain and eating them. But some Pharisees saw them do it, and they protested, as you do, as a good Pharisee. If you're not grumpy and religious, you're not a Pharisee. Look, your disciples are breaking the law by harvesting grain on the Sabbath. Keep going. Jesus said to them, haven't you read in the scriptures what David did when he and his companions were hungry? Pause. When Jesus talks to the Pharisees who think they know everything and have the corner lot on the Bible, and he starts with, haven't you read in the scriptures? That's Jesus for a burn. That's Jesus for, I'm going to say this in order to tick you off. Because of course they've read it. Because they have it memorized. Okay, the Pharisees prided themselves on being just to the letter of the law, knowing it, but what did they forget? What did they miss? The spirit of the law. And so when Jesus says, haven't you read it? He's not actually asking. He's not seeking information. He's humbling them in that moment and frustrating them all in one swift motion. It's beautiful. When David went into the house of God, into the tabernacle, and he and his companions broke the law by eating the sacred loaves of bread that only the priests are allowed to eat. Remember that story? Right? He's saying, hey, Pharisees, don't you remember? And haven't you also read in the law of Moses? Now he drops Moses. Even more frustrating, because the Pharisees like, no, we have the book of Moses memorized. Of course I've read it, right? That the priests on duty in the temple may work on the Sabbath. Like the priests actually work on the Sabbath. I tell you, there is one here who is even greater than the temple. But you would not have condemned my innocent disciples if you knew the meaning of this scripture. Another burn. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. Twice here, Jesus claims divinity. After showing the Pharisees that they missed the entire spirit of the law. I like this Jesus a lot. Sometimes we domesticate Jesus again, and he's just like lotus posing through fields. But this is a raw, truth-telling, bona fide Jesus, right? And right here, he just claimed divinity. He claimed to be God twice. And what he ends by saying is that I am the Lord of the Sabbath. I originally put the Sabbath in place, and I am going to tell you what the Sabbath is for. You are not going to sit there and dictate to me, God in flesh, what the Sabbath is for. You're not going to do it. And the Pharisees are not happy about that at all. But the Sabbath doesn't start there. Jesus is pointing back to an even greater Sabbath. Go back to Genesis 2. We don't have a lot of time, but let's do it quickly. Genesis 2. On the seventh day, after all of creation, chaos becomes order. Nothing becomes something. God creates functions, puts everything in its place, and it's all good. When God has done that work, he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day, blessed it, he set it apart, he made it distinct, and he declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. Pause for a second and just sit in the strangeness of this with me. God rested. The non-sleeping, all-powerful, all-sufficient creator God rested. Why? Well, I can tell you why it wasn't. It wasn't because he was tired. It wasn't because he needed a break. It wasn't because he was already fed up with human beings. What he does is he does this so that just as glorious as the universe is, so is this moment of rest, because it says something about the nature and character of God. Now again, we don't have a lot of time to unpack this, but in the context of Genesis, in the creation narrative, this is emphasizing the point that God, who is outside of creation, who is outside of the created order, takes up residence in the created order. And the whole Genesis narrative is painting a picture that this God, over and against other ancient Near Eastern gods, that he makes himself knowable and relational, and that he doesn't need to dwell in a place, he doesn't need to have idols to be worshipped well, that he actually takes up residence and he moves into the neighborhood of creation. So the garden in the creation story is the very first and only true temple. God moves into the neighborhood and he takes up residence in the garden to say that creation reflects me, and through creation are signs and arrows pointing to have relationship with me. And what does he do? He rests. Why? Because he's making the point that it's in that cosmic temple of creation that we are invited to come and meet God, and in that process find our true rest. It's not just a nice poetic story. It is the true story of reality. And it's beautiful. Now, the Hebrew word for Sabbath doesn't just mean rest, although it does come to mean that, but what it actually means is stop. There's a stillness about it. There's this moment of silence and still in Sabbath. It means rest from one's work. Why? Because work is normal and Sabbath is special. And in Sabbathing well and in resting well, what we're doing is we're committing to stopping. To stop wanting, to stop wishing, to stop dreaming, to stop working, to stop worrying, to stop cleaning, to stop shopping, to stop texting, to stop watching. To stop. To stop and rest. But it also can mean delight. We stop not just to stop for the sake of stopping, we stop in order to delight. That Sabbath rest is not just relaxation, it's resting. And not all relaxing activities are restful. Are you with me on that? After 3 hours of binging on Netflix, I don't feel rested, I feel like a slob. Right? Like I don't walk away after a Netflix binge going, pretty holy. Like me and Jesus were tighter than ever. Like I don't. I walk away going like, I probably should have done something better with my time. The worst is when Netflix asks you whether you're still there. You get that one? I actually think that was the Holy Spirit building that mechanism into Netflix to go do something now. But it's just a convicting moment of, are you still there? And you have to like guiltily go, yes. But not all relaxing activities are restful. Because if you notice what the Sabbath is for or unto, sometimes you'll see, the Lord. Sabbath is not for you and I, it's for the Lord. He made it holy. Why? Because he is holy. He makes the Sabbath set apart. Why? Because he is set apart. So the Sabbath is an invitation to stop focusing on all ordinary things and to delight in what is extraordinary. To delight in the only true source of all beauty and life and truth. So all of these other things, although they're not bad, and all Netflix is not bad, and our devices are not bad, and working well and hard is not bad, those are ordinary. And so what Sabbath rest invites us into is to slow down, to cut off those things, and to set apart a time to focus and delight in who God is. And I think the reason why, not just Western culture, but the Western church looks so similar to everybody else in our context is because we have forgotten the Sabbath. We've either gotten legalistic and religious about it and emptied it of its real meaning, or we've moved on and kind of went, Jesus fulfilled the law and we don't do that anymore. And then we've just made up other stuff, like Sabbathing on a Wednesday because, right? Like, I don't know, we've either gotten way too loose or way too legalistic about it, and in doing that, we have lost the true meaning of the Sabbath. We've lost the true meaning of stopping. And here's the thing, church. God weaves regular rest into the fabric of creation. Into the very fabric of creation. If we work against the grain of that, we are literally working against the way that you and I were wired. We're working against our purpose. So no wonder we're restless when we don't make time for rest. No wonder we're looking for satisfaction in all sorts of non-gods that are not going to satisfy us because we've forgotten to look to the God of rest. We've forgotten to find our identity as a culture in the God of rest. So we go and look for rest in all sorts of other things. And material things and accumulation and new and better and all sorts of things that ultimately, culturally, is leaving us more depressed, more medicated, and more restless than ever. Why? Because we're working against our wiring. That we literally are experiencing a short-circuiting of the human person today because we're not resting well. And we're not resting right. We're not resting with the right focus. So, This invitation into rest and the invitation that Jesus offers and why he says he's the Lord of the Sabbath is because he's saying the same purpose of the Sabbath in the garden is the same reason why I'm here. Just like God took up residence in creation in Genesis, Jesus is standing going, and I am God taking up residence here with you. And for him to say to the Pharisees that something better than the temple is here, oh boy, that alone would get him killed.